In today's episode of HR Visionaries, I talk to Nigel from Dedalus. We talk about the importance of personal interaction in the age of AI. Stay tuned. Welcome to HR Visionaries, where we unlock the secrets of modern HR. I'm Benjamin, your host. Join us as we shed light on today's HR universe with HR leaders and innovators from across the globe. Whether you're an HR pro, a business leader, or just curious about the future of work, this is your shortcut to the forefront of HR innovation. Brought to you by Hire, the AI talent attraction platform. Welcome to our latest episode of HR Visionaries. I'm looking forward to my guest today, Nigel. Thanks a lot for taking the time.
You're absolutely welcome. It's a pleasure.
Nigel, can you tell us in like 5 or 6 sentences, who are you?
Of course I can. I'll try and keep it to 5 or 6 sentences.
Well, that's already the first one, right? So.
Yeah, that's the first challenge. Yeah. How do you tell your whole life in a small snapshot? But I'll try my best.
Lovely.
Obviously, I'm Nigel Gordon-Johnson. I'm based in the UK, as you might have guessed by my accent, but based in the UK. And I've been working in the technology arena for, I hate to admit, nearly 30 years now. So it's been a long time. It's obviously been bad to me. I've lost most of my hair and it's going a different color. But and a large proportion of that has been in talent acquisition and recruiting. So that's been across the board, both from a UK base, European base, and global base. But strangely, I actually started my career in sales. So I was actually selling technology, so IT solutions, software solutions, which I guess has sort of given me quite an insight as to what it's like to be on the receiving end of recruitment. And I hopefully that's helped me throughout my career on that side of things. So that's a little bit about me.
It's super interesting. I think there's so many things we will talk about today. Can you tell us a bit about how has recruiting changed within the last 30 years? So that's obviously a pretty long time span. How have things changed? 30 years ago was like the advent of internet, probably. Since then, a lot has happened.
It's a great question, and it's the funny thing is, I was actually saying this to somebody the other day. I'm so old that I can remember what it was like when I first left school to go and get a job. And back then, for anyone who's sort of under the age of 35, 40, will probably think this is a strange story. But what you used to have to do then was literally use a typewriter to type up your CV. And having then typed it up, you would then go to a photocopying shop, because in those days, you would have shops in the high street which would just do photocopying. So you go in there, take about 100 odd photocopies, and you would then have to mail them out to people. There were some agencies back then, but you would take a copy of your CV and give it to them. So everything was physical. So it's basically, the interesting part of it is that the process has sort of stayed the same. So the process of getting a CV, sending it out and everything is more or less identical. The only difference is that what technology has done, the internet, etc., has made life a little bit quicker and simpler than having to write it out on a typewriter, which was a bit more of a challenge.
Isn't that a bit shocking that, well, in essence, it's kind of the same. You just use different means to distribute?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, it's interesting when you sort of think about that, because recruiting is one of those industries where I think for a long time, organizations have tried to see, how do we automate everything? How do we try and create more automation throughout the recruiting process? And in order to try and do that, they've kept the same template of, this is what somebody does, this is how they do it. And that's why now, still, if you asked somebody, how do you get a job? I'm looking for a job. What have you been doing? They'll say, well, I've sent my CV out to 100 different companies and I'm waiting for them to come back to me. Essentially, that's no different to what happened 30 years ago. Now, life has clearly moved on and changed quite a lot. And part of, I think, what I talk to a lot of different people about is how we need to adapt to that next generation to try and how do you find a job better than you've done before, and accepting the old ways of doing things has got to change. And there are far better ways, you know, with the onset of places like LinkedIn, etc., with 1 billion different members. And strangely, and also I'd add, it's interesting when you say, why is it that we're still doing that in recruiting when our behaviors as people have changed? So with the onset of social media, with Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, everybody communicates in a very different way to the way they used to. But when it comes to recruiting, it's almost like they sort of stop and think, oh no, I can't socially interact with people in order to try and have a softer introduction. I've got to go back to the old way. That's what you do. So yeah, it's interesting that it hasn't really adapted or changed that much.
Well, I've just had a very interesting conversation about, of course, the importance of artificial intelligence in literally every aspect of life. And it's actually really interesting when you think about like there was a generation, let's say 2 decades ago, that grew up pre-internet. Then there was this generation before that grew up pre-personal computers, so to say. And then now we have a new generation growing up that is the generation pre-AI. And the next generation that will be like basically like not just used to, well, there are personal computers, there is the internet out there, but also like AI is something I'm totally used to. And there is, I couldn't imagine a world without AI. So I think that's actually super interesting perspective. So that it will be the last generation pre-AI, basically, that's now growing up.
It's very true, and you know, I think the pace of change is remarkable in terms of technology that is out there. I think the real thing that people wrestle with, I think, in recruiting is the loss of the personal touch. So I think that's the bit where I think people have really struggled, and technology has struggled in recruiting up until now, to see how do we enhance what we've already got and how do we make sure we don't lose that personal touch, because people want to see other people. And it's interesting because, again, I've had this conversation about AI recently with another organization, and they were saying that same thing. Oh, well, you know, if I have AI, we're just going to lose all the personal interaction. And it's like, it's not there to sort of put a robot there so that the candidate never is going to speak to anyone again. You know, I think the onset of AI is super fascinating in terms of for the recruitment industry, because it's there to enhance that ability in terms of what we need to do. We were talking off camera just before we started here about how you cut videos and put that together, and that other people can do it a lot quicker than necessarily you or I could probably do. Which might be a generational thing, I don't know. But in the same way, AI does that for you. It is there to help to make things quicker, simpler, more efficient, etc., rather than replace. And I think that's a bit that I think people need to sort of slightly wrestle with.
It's super interesting that you mentioned before that, you had a career in sales and, before choosing a career in recruiting. And I think, nowadays, and we're going to talk about this, indeed, that, sales and recruiting are very similar functions. However, I think in particular in sales, the personal interaction is so incredibly important that you need someone on the other side that you can trust and who you can talk to, in particular when things are getting difficult. And therefore, I think this personal touch is probably something even of greater importance to you as to many other people, probably, given your background in sales.
Yeah, completely. And it's interesting how we sometimes don't like to think of that, but I couldn't agree more. I think there are so many similarities in there. And, you know, key to sales is understanding your customer. What is it that they want? What do they need? What are their pain points? What are the issues, the challenges that they're having? And sometimes, just as there is with a candidate, you know, it might not be a right fit. It may not be that actually what we've got, our solution is not quite what you're looking for at this time. And that works both in sales and that. And so the very best salespeople are the ones who can qualify their customers, qualify their prospects, understand what it is that they need, and provide the right solution. And it's exactly the same thing, I think, with recruiting as well. I think, you know, good recruiters tend to be people who follow that methodology. Often, again, it sort of gets confused with sales, where they think it's just you need to browbeat somebody and force it down. It has a bit of a bad rap, but it shouldn't do, because the best salespeople are the ones who understand honestly what there is. It's an honest assessment of where it is and finding the right people at the right time for it, just like recruiting should be.
However, there's obviously the difficulty that, well, both in sales but also in recruiting, you sometimes fall in love with your counterpart. So it's like, okay, wouldn't that be the perfect candidate? And that also in sales, okay, perhaps there are some red flags, but I'm sure we can get over it. How do you teach yourself? How do you teach your team? Be honest, it doesn't make any sense to drag someone through the process despite okay, honestly, there are one or two red flags. Identify them very early on. Don't waste time with people. You know it's not going to work, but it's like this emotional thing. Okay, well, I looked for someone for so long. Okay, I found someone. So this honesty, okay, it's not that guy, both in sales but also in recruiting.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I always tend to look at it, and I think that we're certainly with my clients, where we push a lot is on candidate experience and what people want to do. I mean, you mentioned about it. Let's not waste time. Well, let's not waste time for a candidate. Let's qualify both of us right as early as we can do to assess where it is. And often I look for it to say that it's down to the recruiter having confidence and ability to be able to say, actually, no, this isn't quite right at the moment for you.
It's a tough thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely, really tough. And sometimes it's recruiters are always under a lot of stress and pressure. That an internal talent acquisition will always have a lot of pressure from the business to get their hires. The business has a lot of pressure to ensure that they've got either a replacement hire or a new growth in there. They might have a new customer or whatever. The pressure is going to be a lot. So sometimes that pressure can mean that a recruiter can think, I have to push in who I think could probably be good and I really like them. I know there's some red flags there, but I'm going to try and push them forward to try and do that. Now, there's a fine line between actually I can see beyond this, and these are the different areas you need to qualify. But yeah, for sure, I think it's important to constantly qualify throughout the process to make sure that we're not wasting people's time, both the hiring managers and candidates. And you'll find the right candidate that way. And I think also you build your reputation as an honest broker, as somebody who can be trusted, both from the business and also from candidates coming to you as well. So I think there's an important dynamic there. Just as a good salesperson, even though people might think that they're sort of lumped in with solicitors or barrister, legal people, and politicians in being the most dishonest, the best ones are the most honest.
Indeed, and please tell us more about how do you become this honest broker? So I think many of our listeners will definitely agree. Well, that is like the ideal stage. However, as a human being, one is of course always vulnerable to those feelings where you're like, okay, I've done so much work. Wouldn't it be great if I had now this person just fitting towards the kind of reality I built myself? So if you can talk us a bit through that, how do you become this honest broker? That would be great.
Yeah, I mean, it probably comes a little bit with time. I think sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's the confidence of having the experience behind you. Quite often, having gone through the pains yourself, where we're all human. We all have gone through bits where we've tried to put a candidate in because you're under those stresses and pressures, and it just hasn't worked out. And invariably it doesn't work out. So I think to position yourself and have the confidence as a recruiter, however much experience you've got of brokering honestly on both sides, I think people will respect you an awful lot more when you have that. And one of the key skill sets, I think, for really good recruiters is the ability to be able to deliver bad news.
Mm-hmm.
Because, of course, with candidates, 99% of them we will be rejecting. Mm-hmm. So 99% of the time, we are managing expectations to say you're not quite a right fit for this role. And it can either be by email because it's right from the CV, or it can be over the phone where they've done it, either they've gone to an interview. And sometimes the most painful conversations are the ones where a candidate has gone through a lengthy interview process and just been pipped at the post at the end. So I think developing those skill sets of being able to be being honest and diplomatically honest, but honest with both candidates and also with hiring managers, I think helps an awful lot. And that can be a mixture of the experience you get over time, but also really good training and understanding the technology in the market that you're representing.
Well, I totally hear you. I must say that the first time I delivered such a message, I must say it felt really hard to be just honest. Okay, well, unfortunately, that's not a fit. Over time, you grow into that role, and obviously, you should always be mindful. Okay, that's a human being sitting in front of me. So, and their hopes and dreams kind of rest in the answer I will now give, or the feedback I will be giving. So therefore, it's quite a learning opportunity to I think also in a situation where you interview or when you work together with another partner, well, to first learn and then deliver rather than just jumping into it.
It really is. I think it's I remember a few years ago when I was actively recruiting, just solely recruiting rather than leading talent acquisition functions and sort of more of the strategic side, but in being super operational. Some of my colleagues would always slightly chuckle at me because I would diarize times of rejections. So I would have times that I would put in my calendar where either it's a particular role where we've gone through an interview process and I'm literally just call after call, just going through, speaking to them, giving them feedback, rejecting them through it. And it's because I think a lot of recruiters find that hard. Mm-hmm. We as human beings find it. Nobody likes to deliver bad news to people. And I guess it is a little bit of a skill. We're always fearful, I think, of the fact that somebody's going to take it badly and blame you for it. And so we sort of tend to be quite reluctant to want to give something back. In my experience, you always get some that take it badly, no matter how good you are at delivering it, how soft you're going to do it. They can be so invested in that process that they can take it badly. But that's the way it is. That unfortunately you can't govern how well they will receive the news. But I think again, I think it's really important if you understand the candidate through that process well, as you say quite rightly. They've got their hopes and dreams. They've got their own family. Sometimes they've got their pressures. They might be suddenly thinking, how am I going to pay the mortgage? I need this job. And when they've suddenly just lost out because of one minor thing, it can sometimes seem unfair to them. Mm-hmm. I think one of the clear elements to it is sort of one is giving them positive feedback to see what is the critique that you can have that you can work on. What did you do slightly not quite right that if you do next time, that's going to help you? Or there might be a skill set that we particularly want in this organization that if you can get more skill in this area, that's going to really, really help. So whatever it is, I think it's always important not just to give a fairly standard rejection way, but to really give constructive feedback so people can really work on it and really help. At the end of the day, their feedback's not necessarily going to help them pay their mortgage next month, but what it might do is it'll make them more successful when they go through to the next interview stage. And I think as going back to being the honest broker, I think part of us have that. I think we have that part of us that we should be there, not just in terms of filling roles and doing that, but also being able to help people, genuinely trying to help people. And whether they come back to us at one point, they might do. But I think also to be able to help them succeed, to develop their careers, even if it's outside of the company that you're representing, I think that's part of what we should be doing.
Well, you mentioned before that you spent 30 years in tech and recruiting, and then I think you could also see some shifts in the landscape, like 2-3 years ago when everything going bonanza, and well, obviously it was, well, at least for many companies, the tech space very much selling your company to the candidate. Now things are shifting again slightly, but how did you coach your team to be mindful of those changes? That, well, and sometimes it's really tough to hire great people because there's like so much demand from so many companies out there, and then, well, at other times it's perhaps okay, we need to be a bit more restrictive. How do you manage a team in these times?
Yeah, look, it's a great question because and absolutely there is a fluctuation in terms of whether it's a high demand for certain candidates or it's an easy market, a slightly slower market. You know, it is changing, and we've probably witnessed in the last few years a sort of microcosm of what's happened in the last 30 years. In that we've had those fluctuations quite a lot in the last 3 years because of the global pandemic, because of the big push to rehire, and then suddenly a slowdown again, and you know, so it's happening a lot. I think fundamentally the basics are probably going to remain the same in terms of how you approach the market, what you need to do. I think it's about individuals making a real difference, and I think, you know, certainly from a candidate perspective, it's how do you add value to that experience that the candidate's having. Now, some of it is proactive of what the recruiter can do, and obviously there's an awful lot in terms of what recruiting technology can do as well. So there is that element to it, whether you're keeping in communication, you're feeding information back to it. I think it's super important for talent acquisition teams to have a really strong branding, strong employee value proposition, so that candidates have that information at hand to understand, what is this culture am I going to succeed in that? And that's part of the things that have changed in terms of candidate dynamics. There used to be an awful lot previously about, well, how much money are you paying me? Mm-hmm. Is it a better skill? You know, it didn't, and in terms of where the office was located, office location is slightly different. You know, we've got quite used to remote working, hybrid working. There's less where people are spending all their time in office, especially in technology. So that tends to mean that the candidates are looking a lot more strongly at the softer elements of a role. You know, what is this culture in this company? What is the management techniques? What is the leadership here? How do I expand my career here? Can I move? Is there good internal mobility? So there's a lot of things there that you have to consider in order to attract it. That gets back to what we said earlier on about being good sales, because that's part of that discovery of understanding from good candidates, well, what are their motivators? What is it for them that they're looking for? What is important to that individual? Why, whether it's working from home, is it the fact, actually, I don't want to work from home because kids drive me crazy and I've got nowhere to work? It's really important to do that. And I think that's where you can start making a difference as a recruiter in challenging times, over and above all the technology, because there's lots of things you can do there that will help. But from an individual point of view, I think having those really core skill sets of really getting to understand your candidate, and if you do that and they trust you, I think you've got a much better idea of actually landing the very best talent for your organization.
Well, it sounds actually like a pretty easy task, right? So you just need to get the culture right. You just need to get your employer value proposition right, and then you're there.
If only it was like.
Exactly right. So it's like a Friday afternoon kind of workshop, I guess, right?
Well, the issue we always have, of course, is that we're dealing with human beings, and the great thing about people is that is as much as they can be predictable, they are predictably unpredictable. And in my full years of life in business, I've learned that no matter what it is, people can do the strangest things, and the stranger things can happen. No matter how well you think you know them, they're definitely going to come. They're definitely going to clear this deal. It can change, but it's also really important to remember that, and sometimes people forget that, and especially when you're in a strong position from a business point of view, where you think, oh, there's not many jobs about, so therefore I've got my pick. It's still a two-way street. Mm-hmm. It's still a 50-50 thing. It shouldn't be about, I'm just going to sit there, you parade, and I pick whoever I want. It's got to be right both ways. And I think candidates are getting a lot more savvy nowadays, and you mentioned also earlier about that that dynamic in terms of what people have grown up with, whether they are pre-internet, internet, pre-AI and post-AI. There's a lot of different dynamics there, and people at different experience levels in their career will look at what company to select in a very different way, and that also adds a complexity into how you select and what you do.
How does candidate experience you mentioned before? How does it play into this? Given a very good accommodating candidate experience is of course something so vastly different from like a very traditional approach of like, hey, we're using technology from 15 years ago, but deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw somewhere a little while ago, I read that about the three most stressful things in life, which were sort of divorce, moving house, and also finding a new job. And it probably is. I think for an awful lot of people, finding a new job, whether it's been forced on them or whether they decide, I'm fed up with my manager, or I'm not earning enough, I need to go and find a new job, it can be stressful. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest complaints I think that candidates have, if you ask them what are the things that you dislike the most in your candidate experience when you're looking for a new job, the number one complaint that will always come up is, I've applied for a job, I never heard anything. They ghosted me. I just hear nothing. And it happens so much. And it's one of the things I'm so keen to try and change. It's something that it isn't easy sometimes. Technology helps a lot. So I think that over communicating is probably better. So at each point, being able to communicate, and we can send out different messages, you can use AI to be able to interact with them. As long as somebody's getting something, so you understand what's happening in that process, and you don't just suddenly hear nothing for 2 months, I think people are actually find that a much better experience. So I think that's the number one thing I think that every organization can do relatively straightforwardly is sort out, how do I communicate with candidate? How do I keep them updated? Even if it's a no, it's nice to know. People want to hear that.
Indeed. And Nigel, can you tell a bit more about the challenges you guys are currently working on? I think what you said about candidate experience is so incredibly important. Also, well, being mindful of it's a very respectful way to treat people, in particular now with so many technology companies out there that provide on the customer side a great experience. You're kind of used to, great experience in any dimension of interacting with a company.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting because also you have almost sort of fairly uniquely for the recruiter, if you're acting as a salesperson, you have two clients. You've got the candidate and you've got your hiring manager, so that there are two distinct clients. So the first thing is it's not just the candidate experience. You've got other people who you have to do. So it's the hiring manager experience as well. So the two go really hand in hand in terms of making sure that happens. A lot of that you have to sort of do up front. So obviously, yes, there's lots of elements that you have to have preset. And if you can get the more information you've got, the more brochures, the more information you can give out, whether it's video content, whether it's written content, pictorial content, for both sides, I think the more of that will help. But essentially what it is really understanding the process from both sides of it, having that honesty we talked about again before, and trusting the fact that, and accepting, I want people to be able to leave reviews, good and bad, but I want people to leave reviews for me and see what it is. There are more and more tools out there that do that, whether it's Glassdoor and places like that, Google. Obviously, there's lots of review sites that people do. And again, candidates are quite savvy. They will look to see what other people's experiences have been for a job interview. So it gets around quite quickly.
Can you tell us a bit more about your approach towards like the next few years? What do you think are going to be the big trends we're going to see, the big trends that also present a great opportunity for us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for sure, AI we've talked about it a lot. That is going to make a really big difference. And there's lots of different elements to it. So I think, first of all, the big ATS systems as to how they integrate AI within that. So for the larger technology companies that are using, whether it's Workday or Greenhouse or whatever, we'll all want to see, what is going to be good AI that's going to work within that. We're already seeing LinkedIn, for instance, that has introduced AI into its recruiter platform. Mm-hmm. So for when you're sending emails out, it's creating personalized emails for candidates that you're doing candidate outreaches for. And I think we're going to see that a lot more expanded out there. So that's the number one big play. And I know that's what everyone talks about is in AI in lots of different areas, but I think it absolutely will do. So that's from that. Then you're going to have, within AI, you're also going to have the additional technology. So a lot of other companies that will add value to recruiting processes. So they will be in addition to the Workdays and et cetera, the big ATSs of this world. And a lot of that, I think, is going to be much more on the sort of improved candidate experience, the enhanced candidate matching, certainly diversity and inclusion. Mm-hmm. I think that's, it's a big topic at the moment, and I think that's going to continue to do so. I think AI has a really, really good part to play in helping with that. Clearly and obviously, cost reduction. There is a constant look at costs, and recruiting has perhaps sometimes got the short end of the wedge when it comes to cost reduction. But I think they certainly will look to see that. But then I think also some of the more other areas which are really going to benefit organizations and that AI can help, which is where creating talent pools and how to manage those more effectively and dynamically. So it's not just about, I've got a job, I advertise it, and AI is going to help me get those ones. But also, we hire predominantly Java here and in this particular region, and I want to create a talent pool and start engaging with people so I can get through that process better. How do I do that better? And so that talent pool management, I think, will do it. And then really finally, I think we're more and more being data-driven in our decision-making and what we do. AI, I think, will provide truly valuable insights from recruitment data that we've over and above and quicker than what we've had before. I think some of the challenges for people like myself in leading large talent acquisition functions is getting really good data at pace, in real time. You're collecting from lots of different sources. You're trying to find that and then evaluate it. I think AI will really make that better. understanding hiring trends, time to fill ratios, that kind of a thing, and will really help talent acquisition leaders make very much more informed decisions going forward.
Nigel, I have a last question for you. Since you talked so much about selling your employer value proposition, tell me, what do you guys do and why is it great to work for you guys?
That's a great decision. That's a great one. So obviously, yeah, I'm the group head of talent acquisition at Dedalus Healthcare, and I think one of the greatest things I think we have is, first of all, being in a technology environment where you are truly making a difference to people out there. It's life-giving software. So it enables that and enables clinicians to make incredible decisions. So it's a fascinating environment to be in for a start. So you're making a real difference to people's lives. So that's the first thing I would say. From a point of view of the business itself, Dedalus is a large global technology company, had a lot of acquisitions. So there's an awful lot of transformational change that's taking place, including in talent acquisition as well. And when you have organizations like that, and we're just a little bit under 8,000 people globally, it's fascinating. You have a real ability and chance to make a significant difference, develop your career, because it's changing so much. I think sometimes when you go to very large organizations, not that I'm sure they're not bad, but like an Oracle or an IBM, they've already gone through all that. There's lots of structures. You've got hundreds of thousands of employees. It's difficult to make an impact and to make a difference and to develop a career other than what is structured there to do it. I think in more dynamically moving organizations, you have that opportunity, and Dedalus certainly has that. And finally, I think, we talked about culture and the way of working. It is a very open, welcoming, encouraging environment. And I think that's a wonderful start for any organization to have. I think if you have that, it's one that really helps. So I think, yeah, absolutely. It's always a delight to hire people for Dedalus.
Nigel, it was amazing talking to you. It was great fun. Loved hearing about your perspective on sales and recruiting, about candidate experience. Thank you so much for being part of HR Visionaries.
Benjamin, it's an absolute pleasure, and I've really enjoyed it. As you can probably tell, I'm quite passionate about it. I enjoyed it. Even after 30 years, I still can get passionate about it.
I like the 30-year number. Thanks a lot, Nigel. Great talking to you.
Thank you.
And thanks a lot, guys, for listening in. I'm sure you enjoyed it as much as I did. Have a great day and see you later.